You can go ahead and get started now, Randy.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Randy Bretz, and I'll be your host for this evening's forum featuring 11 of the 12 candidates seeking to fill the 3 at-large seats on the Lincoln City Council during our coming election. During our time together this evening, you'll have an opportunity to learn a bit about each candidate and also where they stand on a number of environmental issues. And hopefully this will help you with your decision on how to cast your vote in the April primary election and in the May general election. The Lincoln City Council makes laws, it approves budgets, and it has the authority to audit city agencies. The council has 7 members, 4 of whom are from regular districts and 3 are elected at large. The full council meets on Mondays in regular session at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the city council chambers of the county city building, and the council committees also meet on a fairly regular basis to discuss and prepare laws. And all council meetings are open to the public. It's the 3 at-large seats that will be filling this in the spring elections. The primary is on April 6th, and the general election is on May 4th. Let me tell you who the candidates are, and you can see them on your screen. Tom Beckius, Eric Burling, Roy Christensen, Mary Hilton, Peter Kozlowski, Elina Newman, Trevor Reilly, Bennie Shobe, Maggie May Squires, Joseph Swanson, Sändra Washington, and Orang Zeb. Well, this evening you'll hear from 11 of the 12 candidates. Peter Kozlowski did not reply to the invitation. We have some very simple rules for this forum. We'll begin by giving each candidate 35 seconds to introduce herself or himself. Then I'll ask a question and they will each have 70 seconds to respond. They've each received those questions in advance, and I listed the candidates in alphabetical order. And for each question, we'll start in that order, and then we'll just move to the next person to be the first one to respond. So, Mr. Beckius, you're the first one on the list, so please tell us a little about yourself. And our moderator, Chelsea Johnson, who is with the Nebraska Conservation Voters, will let you know if you go over time.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Beckius, and I currently serve as your Lincoln-Lancaster County Planning Commissioner. As your commissioner, I have a strong voting record of supporting projects and policies that help make Lincoln a more sustainable community, including voting in support of the Climate Action Plan, voting to increase wind farm opportunities in Lancaster County, and approving the expenditures to convert all City of Lincoln streetlights to more energy efficient LED lighting. Lincoln is where I'm from, and protecting it is important to me. Thank you all for attending tonight, and I look forward to our discussion.
Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you, Randy. Hello, I'm Eric Burling. I was born in Lincoln 36 years ago, and I've lived here my entire life. I've owned and managed an international business for 12 years, have been married for 10 years, and have been a father for 8 years. I love Lincoln, and so I'm running to keep Lincoln great, to keep us safe, to support local businesses, to strengthen our schools and the futures of our children, and to bring some common sense to government. I'll prioritize economic growth for our city through free enterprise policies. I'll prioritize American values and equality of opportunity in Lincoln. Please visit my website, burlingforlincoln.com, to learn more about me. Thank you.
And Roy Christensen.
Well, welcome everyone. Glad to be here. I am a husband of 1, father of 7, grandfather of 13. I'm an Army veteran, an audiologist, and here shortly I'll complete 8 years on the City Council. I have been active in doing things that promote conservation in our city. I was the one that brought compressed natural gas buses to Lincoln through a negotiated deal with our friends at Black Hills Energy, and I've done a number of other things that we'll talk about later. Thanks.
And Mary Hilton, tell us about you.
Everyone. So good to be with all the candidates tonight. Thanks for hosting, Randy and Chelsea. I was born in McCook, Nebraska, raised just across the border in Northwest Kansas. I was born to a farmer and a long line of farmers, and my husband and I met at K-State, where I got an accounting degree. We have 7 children, lived in Lincoln the last 17 years. I have a background in accounting and municipal auditing, and I love to dig into budgets and proposals, and I hope to be restore some balance at City Hall.
And Elina Newman.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Elina Newman. I am a conservative independent candidate. I have lived in Lincoln for 26 years, ever since I moved here as a refugee in 1993. I was born in Baku, Azerbaijan. I am married to a wonderful man named Matthew, and I have a 13-year-old going on a 30-year-old daughter, Annalise. I just completed my 10-year goal and obtained my PhD in psychology. I'm pro-accountability, pro-life, pro-constitutional freedom, pro-small business, and pro-making fact-based decisions based on multiple sources. Thank you for coming tonight.
And Trevor, you're next on the list.
Hello, everyone. My name is Trevor Reilly. I am a Marine Corps veteran who has been in Lincoln since 2015, where I came here to study mechanical engineering. And while mechanical engineering didn't turn out for me, I have basically gone on to learn a lot about state government through the legislature, both through Senator Laura Ebke and Senator Mike Groney. And since then, I've also worked with the Lancaster County Libertarian Party, where I think that individual action has the greatest effect to take really the longest term effects here in our community. And I now work as a hemp consultant, where I'm a huge advocate of the carbon negative effects that hemp has with both growing and then utilizing for housing and all sorts of other national uses. And thank you very much for inviting me out here tonight. And I look forward to discussing how individual action has the greatest potential for changing our climate and changing our the way that we use our resources here in Lincoln.
Bennie Shobe, tell us about you.
Hi, thank you, Randy. Thank you, everyone, for hosting. It's good to see all you guys, the fellow candidates for these 3 seats. I was born in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I moved to Nebraska in '98 to go to graduate school, kind of like Trevor, went to school, fell in love with the community and decided to stay. I've been involved with community organizations, nonprofits, and I found that lots of people don't understand how our government works, and I felt I could be a bridge to the residents of our community and work to help them get more engaged in their government. Continue to do that work. I look forward to working with many of you as we make our city better for everyone who lives here.
And Maggie Squires, you're next.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. Hello to all the candidates. Congratulations. My name is Maggie Squires. I'm from Valentine, Nebraska. I went to Hastings College for a couple years before I transferred to UNL. I graduated with a bachelor's degree from Wesleyan and earned a master's in management from Doane College. I currently work for the City of Lincoln parking, off-street parking. We manage 17 parking garages for the City of Lincoln. I am an advocate of the legalization of cannabis and the usage of hemp too. This will help lower taxes, bring in billions of dollars of revenue. I'm also an advocate for solar power. We need to have solar power on every city county building, every new development. I grew up hunting and fishing in the Sandhills, so I understand water is an important resource, one of the most important resources we have, and we need to be environmentally conscious as a city as we move forward.
Thank you. And Joseph Swanson.
Thank you, Randy. I go by the name of Joe. Most of my friends and activists, I'm a member of the Socialist Workers Party, and I've been a 61-year member of the trade unions. I was born here in Lincoln. My wife Marie and I raised 6 children here in Lincoln. I am a retired worker. I've mostly worked on the railroad, meatpacking, other industries. And I have joined and helped organize marches, protests, and strikes for many unions and social protests, and to advance the interests of working people.
Thank you, sir. And Sändra Washington.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Randy and Chelsea, for hosting. My name is Sändra Washington, and I am a councilwoman on the Lincoln City Council, where I've sat for the last couple of years. Before that, I was a planning commissioner, Lincoln Lancaster Planning Commissioner. I came to Lincoln in 1990, and after I got here, I started to work for the National Park Service, where I had a 25-year career working in natural resources and environmental planning and decision-making. I think those skills gives me a great background in conservation issues, and I look forward to continuing my service in Lincoln. Thank you.
And thank you very much. And I don't see Mr. Zeb on the screen, so I assume, Chelsea, we go on to the next question. Is that right? Okay. Recent research indicates that climate disruptions to our country, will occur much earlier than anticipated. Do you believe that human activity is responsible for this climate change? And as a city council member, would you support implementing the recommendations included in the proposed Climate Resiliency Action Plan? And Eric Burling, you are first to answer that question.
Thank you, Randy. Responsible is a big word. Saying humans are responsible for climate change is like saying my son is responsible for my not getting enough sleep last night. Sure, he played some part in it, but it'd be silly for me to say he's responsible for it. Yes, the world's climate is changing. Yes, humans have a role in that change, but I've yet to see a predictive model from the past that has accurately predicted what was going to happen. For my entire life, I've been hearing about ozone this, global warming that, glaciers melting, sea levels rising, and yet no prediction has come true. In fact, those most in the know, like former President Obama, are still buying up multi-million-dollar beachfront property. I guess he's not too concerned about the sea level rising. Climate activist Bill Gates is flying around the world, but he says that's okay. He's Bill Gates. Our climate czar owns 2 private planes, but that's okay because his ability to fly comfortably is more important than the environment, right? I don't support the current plan because the current plan creates new rules that are just going to cost taxpayers money. Lincoln is not a test bed for electric buses, Green New Deals, and the mayor's battery-powered fantasies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Roy Christensen, you are next on my list.
I have yet to decide exactly how I'm going to vote on the climate action plan. In some aspects, I think the plan goes too far. In others, it does not go far enough. I think it goes too far in the energy issue. It is pretty clear from what we've been told by LES that this will result almost certainly in a doubling of our Lincoln electric rates over the first 10 years. This will fall most heavily upon the low-income families, senior citizens on fixed incomes, and small businesses. Where the plan does not go far enough is the number one concern listed in the plan is watershed management. And there is the only concrete thing in the plan that actually governs water is raising the limit from 1 foot out of the floodplain to 2 feet out of the floodplain. And there's no definitive action listed in the plan to deal with flooding along the Salt Creek. So I will hold off and see what the council can do to improve this before I make up my mind.
Thank you very much. And Mary Hilton, you're next.
Thank you. Well, as a daughter of a farmer and a former 4-H kid, I was raised very much with the idea of conservation and stewardship of the land so that it would last and be sustainable for multi-generations of farmers. And my family has successfully done that for many generations since homesteading. And so I definitely believe and care for the land. I believe that we certainly can affect pollution and some micro things in our environment. But I do not support the mayor's, I believe, are worthwhile endeavors, such as securing an additional water source, since water is life, and it's so important to our city, to business, But as a whole, I believe that the plan threatens the economic prosperity of our city, and it comes with few listed price tags, and it will cause a lot of overregulation. And so I do not support it.
Thank you. And Elina, you're next.
I believe some of it we're responsible for. For example, pollution to our oceans. Some of it is a natural consequence of living and evolving as a society. As far as climate resiliency action plan goes, I'm in support of some of it not so much. So I would need to see some changes. I would need to have some discussions and some questions answered. I'm all in support for what city wants to do to make sure that it is operating with energy efficiency in mind. I'm all for increasing education opportunities, partnerships, more commuter kinds of programs from point A to point B between educational institutions. I'm all about green spaces. However, I am concerned about how all of this will be done when we are nowhere near ready in terms of size, electric grid, and infrastructure as we're trying to make it out of a pandemic. Financial burdens can be huge for small businesses and citizens alike. Businesses already have too many rules and codes. Are we making this attainable? I'm questioning some of the vague language. How are we going to limit water? Are we shutting off water to residences at certain points in the day? How are we going to limit energy usage? Are we going to promote rolling blackouts? I've lived in a country where limits were placed on water and electricity. It's not something that I want to relive again. What are the incentives? Is the incentive the fact that if you do not do these things, that a person or business will be fined? How are we going to ensure that whoever implements this plan is not going to abuse it? How are we going to make sure that recommend, encourage, and suggest language does not become a mandate?
Thank you. And Trevor, what's your response?
So as far as the climate resiliency plan, I think there's you have to really pick and choose which actions we're already doing and which actions that the mayor is proposing we start. And I think that when we have to look at this climate resiliency plan, we have to really pick and choose about which things that we have the most individual action over. One of those things is reducing water usage over the city. And so if we want to get to less than 110 gallons per person within the city, we have to look at where the major water usages are. And then we also have to look at where residences are doing it. So with our brewers, our industry manufacturers, all this sort of stuff, we have to make sure they're getting the most out of their water usage, as well as making sure that families are turning off the faucets when they're not using them. They're not over showering, over bathing. We have to make sure that we actually really are conserving our resources. And as far as energy goes, we have to look in the long term. I do support looking at alternative sources of energy, but I think in the long term, we have to really examine sources that aren't in the mayor's climate action plan. And that might include thorium salt reactors like Bill Gates has proposed, which are on a very small scale, but can produce a large amount of electricity.
Okay, thank you, sir. And next on the list is Bennie Shobe.
Thank you. Let's start with climate change. I think the actions of humans as we've industrialized our society over the last century and a half have caused changes that have accelerated climate change in our society. And the mayor's climate action plan is a good plan and a good start. I do have some concerns about some of the timelines and some of the objectives, but I think it's a plan, and with the help of the city council and the community, you can modify that plan over time. Many of the plans that we have in place now, our residential development plan, or other issues that other guidelines that the city have are modified over time. We can always come back and edit them. I look forward to working with you, all of you, to make this a better plan for all of us. I support it in its current draft form. I look forward to modifying it to make it better.
Thank you. And Maggie May Squires, you're next.
Oh, hello. The climate action plan. Yeah, I agree with Bennie. I think there's a lot of ways we could modify it to make it work better for the city. However, I do believe to an extent humans are responsible for the rapidly changing climate. I'm sure there's scientific studies to back that up. But what I see is an opportunity here. We've got an opportunity to create jobs, good paying jobs. We need to update our infrastructure. We need to start moving in a direction where we're not worried about the sun not shining the next day. We'll always have the sun. So solar power, eventually we'll run out of fossil fuels. It might not be in my lifetime or your children's lifetime or grandchildren's lifetime, but it'll happen. So what I see is the opportunity for us to start moving forward in a way that makes sense. We can save money for taxpayers. We can create good paying jobs by updating infrastructure, manufacturing, even something as simple as using buildings for hydroponic food production, such as like the Goodyear, the manufacturing plant that sits almost empty. We need to start growing hemp on city-owned property. The Salt Creek resiliency, we've got to start moving forward, fixing our levees, and making sure that we are safe as time goes on and as we move into the future. I think we're going to see more and more flooding, and we want to make sure Lincoln citizens and businesses are safe. Converting city fleets to 100% electric is a great idea. The problem is sometimes you have to take a step backwards to move forwards. So right now we're pulling electricity. All right, I'll stop. I think, are you holding up the card, Chelsea? I can't see.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maggie.
Yeah.
Joe Swanson.
Well, as opposed to calling on the government to act to so-called protect working people, my campaign calls on the working class to act, to organize, to protect our class and extend that protection to all. Part of that is placing demands on the employers and the government, but it's also fighting to wrest control from protection and safety out of their hands. The U.S. is becoming more reliant than ever on electricity, but has no perfect model for running a power market in the 21st century. That's because the capitalist class and their government own everything, and their so-called model of whatever energy source is based on maximizing profit, sharing power supplies. Capitalist companies with the support of their government have peddled the schemes of carbon tax and carbon fees for decades. Meanwhile, finance capital continues to reap super profits from the sale of commodities such as coal, oil, and natural gas, just as they will from energy sources such as wind, solar, nuclear, etc. If we turn everything commonly thought as an environmental issue into how to advance the protection of the working class and how the working class can extend that protection to all, then we can hardly ever go wrong. With that approach, we will increase the possibilities for concrete solidarity and fighting against abuses and outrages.
Thank you, sir. Sändra Washington, you're next.
Thank you. I believe that the heavy inputs of carbon into the environment from our use of fossil fuels has had the impact of speeding up climate change. And it doesn't at some point matter if it's human caused or some other reason. The climate action plan is to help our community become more resilient. I think that the action plan that the mayor has laid out gives us a very good start at lots of different ways to approach the goal of becoming better prepared for the climate change that's going to be approaching. What I like about this plan is that it's flexible. Yes, originally there were over 600 ideas. The plan that first came out had over 300, but the plan that we're looking at right now, the strategy for the next 6 years, looks at 120 different items, all of which may not happen. But what I also like is that we can pick and choose. Not each of these program areas need new authority or new funding, and I expect that as we approach the budget cycle this year, we will have the opportunity to take closer looks at those strategies that are practical and that are possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Sändra. And Tom Beckius, your comments, please.
Sorry about that. So yes, I think human activity plays a serious role in climate change. As your Lincoln Lancaster County Planning Commissioner, I've already voted in February to support the Climate Resiliency Action Plan. And I will continue to support climate resiliency actions when elected to the City Council. But I do want to be clear here tonight and offer a very clear distinction for people. Climate change is real, and proactively addressing the impacts of climate change is simply smart city policy. The affordability concerns that other candidates have been talking about, I think will be reduced over time as innovation grows and markets expand, but addressing the problem is key. The goal of reducing emissions by 80% by the year 2050 and increasing our city's resiliency to climate change are steps in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Our next question is a very short one. What actions do you think the city of Lincoln needs to take to ensure that we protect our water supply? And Roy Christensen, you are next on the list, sir. So
Well,
you'll begin this.
Thank you. The city of Lincoln has been working for several years now, at least 6. We've been talking about bringing in a secondary water supply from the Missouri River. This is a really important project. The total cost will be somewhere around $1 billion as we move forward into this. Now, that doesn't mean Lincoln has to support the entire cost by ourselves, but right now we're working on saving money up through our water rates so that we can then leverage that into borrowing money. Water conservation is key in this aspect, but the projections we looked at about 6 years ago told us that we have to have a secondary water source by 2040, or we're going to be in serious trouble. That will threaten the growth capacity. Now, I anticipate we'll have further innovations that come forward in water saving. We have to be constantly on top of this. The history of the West is the history of water. Either we have too much or not enough. There's an old saying that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. And we need to stay on top of this water issue to make sure we have enough to ensure our growth in the future.
Thank you, sir. I hope you're not trying to pick a fight with me over water.
Just whiskey.
Oh, okay. Mary Hilton, your comments, please, about the water supply.
Certainly. Well, water is critical resource that we must have to live. I've already mentioned that. Nebraskans, we have the largest river system in the country. We have the Ogallala Aquifer, and sometimes we're in drought and sometimes we're in flooding. And so to be a city that's able to meet the needs of its citizens and its businesses, we need to make sure that we have a safe and constant water system. This is one aspect, certainly, of the climate action plan that I do agree with in, securing a second water source, ensuring this city has a long longevity, and that we can meet the needs of the citizens in the future.
Okay, thank you. And next is Elina Newman. Elina?
So I believe water is important. Our adult bodies are 60% water. Being responsible users of water is also important. I do believe that water for inside the home should not be limited. I grew up in a country, like I said, where that was a thing. I do think that there are practical ways businesses and individual homeowners can always be responsible with water, for example, in watering their lawns. I also think we need a better means of capturing the rainwater that is naturally provided for us by nature. I'm sure with innovation and all of the, as we advance as a society, hopefully we'll come up with better ways. But those are just a couple of ways that I can think of right off the top of my head that are practical.
Okay, thank you very much. And Trevor, your comments, please.
And so, as I've already suggested, we should definitely focus on our individual water usage. I do not support providing a cap on it, but I do think that the individuals in Lincoln, either the individual businesses and the individual houses, have probably the best power to conserve our resources on hand. As far as the long-term planning goes, if we do need to go to the Missouri for another source of water, that is one thing, but we should also look at if we do need to provide for future flooding effects, maybe there should be an additional reservoir built where we can additionally draw water from. But as far as the water conservation goes, really it falls on the individual. And I think that through individual action, we have the largest effect of actually conserving our own water resources, yeah, I think that water collection in your own water bales is probably a great alternative to actually watering your own gardens, watering your lawn, because that rain usage can obviously still be used to just distribute that water over the season. So doing these long-term planning aspects where it falls on the individual, taking this individual action is probably where we have the greatest effect of actually like adding up a significant amount. Because as I was taught in the Marine Corps, when we're hiking, ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain. But on the civilian aspect, if we actually look at our individual ounces, our individual little milliliters of water where we use it better, when you shut off the sink, when you're brushing your teeth or just taking a minute less shower, that really adds up over the year. So I think that individual action is still the greater aspect that the city should focus on, and putting out those PSAs. And through the Nebraska extension, that's probably where we have the greatest effect of really conserving these resources through 2040.
Thank you, sir. And Bennie Shobe, your comments, please.
Thank you. I have a little trouble with my old Chromebook processing, so I'm going to shut my video off while I answer, and hopefully that will fix most of the lag. Water is an issue that our city will be dealing with for many years to come. A few years ago, we had a drought in our community, and we asked our residents to conserve water. They did. Water usage dropped, and it never really actually rebounded. We are, as a community, doing a better job of conserving resources. But we also need to move toward a second source. As Mr. Christensen said, we are looking toward the Missouri River. We've been, much like our water supply now comes from Ashland, we planned far in advance for more water, and we're going to do that as a community. We're also looking at our well fields in Ashland, where we share space with Omaha and possibly joining with their system to get some water from them. They have well fields there, and they have a larger capacity than they're currently using. There's a potential to get water from them as kind of a stopgap measure while we go to the Missouri River. But we do need to look at additional sources of water. As our community grows, our need for water will grow. No whiskey, no fighting, but more water.
Thank you, sir. And muting your video did really make a significant difference. Maggie Squires, your comments on water.
So obviously water conservation is a huge issue. I would recommend something like gray water systems. It filters water coming out of your washing machine, out of your bathtub, and then reuses it for home use again, such as going into your toilet, perhaps watering your lawn. I also love the idea of rainwater capture. We could do that on all the large buildings, all the city-owned buildings, all the county-owned buildings in town, and water the front lawn with that. Or use it again as gray water, something that's just, we're not going to touch, but it doesn't go directly to the sewer. I mean, that is one of the hugest ways we waste water. Just gray water that can be reused, maybe on the lawn or something like that, is being thrown into the sewer. Also, we need to look at upstream. We need to work with cities and counties upstream to stop pollution. Herbicide use on farmland runs downstream, and that's moving into our water supply as well. We're lucky we live so close to the Ogallala Aquifer that we can pull groundwater out of these wells along the Platte River, beautiful fresh water. We're so lucky we've got 24,000 miles of rivers and streams. But I think that we need to continue to look at ways that we can conserve and also find a second water source for the state. I'm sorry, for the city and the state.
Thank you very much. And Joe Swanson. And don't forget to unmute, Joe.
Amanda, you should be able to unmute him if you're able to.
All I can do is ask to unmute. It's in the bottom left corner down by, there's start video and then there's mute.
Okay, I think he's unmuted now. Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry. Since all commodities under capitalism, including food and water supply to the population, are produced and marketed with profits in mind, not their utility to human beings, whether so-called natural or synthetic, are subject to poisons, contamination, or shoddy workmanship. That's why we need for the working class and their allies to use their power to protect and defend all human needs. See the example of the ethanol plant near Meade continue to solicit, receive, and process after the Nebraska Department of Environmental and Energy had to knowledge that the ethanol plant was using discarded seed coated with pesticides for the last 6 years. Under the capitalist system, government agencies are used by the capitalist class for their interests and not for working people's protection. That's why this working farmers government.
Okay, thank you. And Sändra, you're next on the list.
I think, like many other candidates this evening, I understand how important water is. Without water, our city will be limited in how we grow. I think one of the most important pieces of the climate action plan is the recognition that we need a second water source. And however we get that, whether we go directly to the Missouri River or we form a compact with Omaha to deliver water to Lincoln while we're getting to the Missouri River, either plan works for me as long as we get there. I know that that is a cost that we're already saving for and we'll share with state and federal funds. But while we get there, I want us to recognize, I think Trevor mentioned it, is that individual actions make a huge difference. And we work together when we were in a drought, and we worked together when we had the overrun of our well fields a couple springs ago. And I know that if we can think about how we can individually make small changes in our behavior, we can save the water that we have or use it wisely while we're still looking for that second source.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Beckius, what's your comment about water?
I don't have much to add that other candidates have not already talked about. Yes, we need to secure a secondary water source. The city has already started planning for that, both physically and financially as well. But we also need to think about what we can do to extend the need for that additional water source. Several candidates have talked about personal use and personal decision-making. I think that's key, but I think we can also talk about in our community incentives and ways that we can entice residents and businesses to better use water, to reduce their water usage over time, so that we can extend the need for that second water source longer into the future.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Burling, the last one, but not least for sure.
Thank you. And the city's current plans include, I think, securing a second water source by 2045 to support our growing population. I think the idea now, though, is that we might want to speed that up and instead work with Omaha's utilities or build our own pipeline to the Missouri. Both of these ideas are extremely expensive, as Roy mentioned, and still very early in the planning process. But I believe we're essentially deciding if there's a need to secure that source before 2045, and perhaps there is that need. And if there is, then I'm open to conversations about the possibilities and further studies to determine the cost benefit of securing that second source before 2045. I agree with many of the other candidates that we as individuals can do a lot to conserve water. We can make sacrifices to better our community while we as a city decide the best possible option for securing that second source of water. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Roy Christensen, you've kind of faded into the darkness. If you want to turn on a light before we come to you next. The next question is, speaking of turning on lights, energy efficiency has many benefits, including reducing customers' energy bills. Would you support the LES increased funding for the Sustainable Energy Program and the low-income energy assistance that provides support for energy efficiency activities? And Mary Hilton, you're first to reply to this question.
Okay. So I believe that it is always the job of government to encourage what is good, and certainly not being wasteful and conserving energy is important. And part of that education can come in ways of, letting the public know that the cost benefit of buying energy efficient appliances and products. And so I think that is an admirable thing, and that should be done. as our city grows, we're going to have an increased need of electricity. And as, if efforts are put into place that really require us to make more things go electric, we're going to need to have more energy produced. So in terms of supporting the program, I believe that it could be desirable to have that businesses and individuals alike and families have used that. And so I'm for probably keeping it at about the same level.
Thank you. And Elina, you're next on the list.
So I am data driven and I tend to ask a lot of questions. So my questions start with, how will this funding be increased? Does that mean another tax? I'm not a fan of that, as Lincolnites have been taxed to death. An incentive, perhaps I'd be supportive, depending on what it is. I would support, for example, if someone's heater or AC went out and they bought a new one, the city would give a utility credit or a break of some sort with a proof of purchase. I support encouraging, not mandating people to be responsible. And I believe if provided with accurate, honest, fact-based information, people will be, or they do the best they can to be. For example, some information that could be provided is what's an optimal temperature to set a thermostat in the winter and summertime. There are conflicting pieces of information out there. Also, what's the appropriate setting of the thermostat to ensure it's not running when no one's home? Same for businesses, being responsible with the resources.
Okay, thank you very much. And Trevor, your comments about our energy efficiency. The screen shows that you're unmuted, but we are not hearing you.
Thank you. Sorry, I had my headset muted. So going into mechanical engineering at UNL, I obviously got into hemp because I learned about the carbon reduction that it could do as a weed. But learning even further when I went into mechanical and I started talking to my nuclear engineering friends, I did learn about how nuclear has a potential for being a zero carbon energy source. And now I think we have the potential in 2020 with what Bill Gates has funded in researching for thorium reactors, that we have very small nuclear engines that we can produce a large amount of electricity for. And so if we really want zero carbon energy sources, we have to include nuclear. And currently LES is only looking at coal, gas, and renewables. And while I do support reducing regulations on wind turbines, I don't support the subsidies for them. I think that there's a lot of carbon that goes into producing the fiberglass and the steel and the transportation to get them set up. I think we're entering a concrete shortage where you have to still pour the 6 foot deep concrete pad. And so I do think that we should look at alternative forms of energy, and we should start looking at really being pioneers when it comes to nuclear.
Okay, Mr. Shobe, and your comments about energy efficiency.
Yep, I thank you, Mr. Britz. So the Lincoln Electric Service does have the Sustainable Energy Program, and they have put a lot of money into that program. And over the last few years, some of that money is going to unused. There's lots of opportunities that aren't being realized. So I'd like to see some of those monies placed in education to make those resources available to the community. As Ms. Newman said, incentivize the changing of resources for more efficient. As someone needs to replace a furnace or an air conditioning unit, let's incentivize them to buy one that's more efficient, maybe tax credits as she referred to. But the big thing the big takeaway is many people don't know the resources are there, and we need, as a community, we as city council members need to do a better job of educating the public about these resources that are available to them. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Maggie May Squires, your comments about energy efficiency.
Sure. I do believe LES is a good shepherd of what is sustainable. However, I agree we need to create more incentives. Again, I can't hammer it enough. Solar, if we could put solar in every building in town, how many jobs would that create? Developers, I think, should also be required to use solar on new and existing buildings. This helps to manage the outsourcing of our electricity, our electric demand, excuse me, and take the burden off the public power usage in our territory. Again, is $1.25 million enough? really to be spending. And like Bennie said, we haven't even used all of it. We need to create lower taxes, lower cost of living for Lincoln citizens. Renewable energy and even nuclear, I'd be open to talking about nuclear too, is another way that we could go no carbon.
Thank you. Joe, what's your comment? Joe Swanson.
Well, what my campaign and the workers' movement that I've been part of for many decades is to sustain is this transformation of nature by human labor to meet all social needs. I also have the question, where is the funding coming from? We live under a profit system, so the funding of any program should come from those that make profit from the energy companies that produce whatever energy source. That's it.
Thank you, sir. And Sändra, your comments, please.
The Sustainable Energy Program is a great program. Like Councilman Shobe had said, all those funds have not been used. I would be amenable to having increased funding into that program, but only if those dollars are going to actually be used to help families, take advantage of energy efficient appliances and things like that. One of the things I think which is very wasteful is if we were to try to give people the money to change their appliances before they've reached their regular end of life. I believe that we should let appliances wear out, and when they do wear out, then it gives folks an incentive to buy something that's more energy efficient. And I also think it's really important that we make certain that we continue programs that provide energy assistance to lower income folks. I don't want to see everyone who has the means benefit from these kinds of programs and lower energy bills overall if we are not doing something to help folks of lower income also have sustainable energy efficient homes so that they too can have that shared benefit.
Thank you very much. Mr. Beckius, your comments about energy efficiency.
Sure. Specifically to the question, yes, I support LES increasing funding for the Sustainable Energy Program so that we can have homes and businesses across the city of Lincoln operating as efficiently as possible. These improvements reduce the use of energy, especially during our peak summer hours. That's really important. And also delay the need for new power generation over the long term. Programs to improve energy efficiency should be available to help vulnerable households as well, reduce their energy costs, whether they're an owner or a renter, because at the end of the day, reducing those energy costs for vulnerable populations helps everyone, not just them.
Thank you, sir. Eric Burling, your comments, please.
Thank you. I don't believe the Sustainable Energy Program needs more funding. There's still over $980,000 left in the fund for this year. Currently, the program provides incentives for insulating attics and walls, high efficiency AC units, and heat pump water heaters. You know how much a heat pump water heater costs? It's $1,600. A standard electric water heater is $400. Okay, LES plus the $300 federal tax rebate subsidize that cost by 50%. But the heat pump water heater is still $300 to $400 more than a normal water heater. Who's going to buy that? What type of family in Lincoln is buying the $1,600 water heater at Home Depot? I'll give you a hint. It's not the families that need financial support. These high efficiency units are just not economically feasible without the government subsidizing the cost. And add to that, people only buy new units when their current units break and they need replacing. Why should our tax dollars go to help rich families pay for top of the line appliances? Our tax dollars as subsidies should be going to people who need the money, not to the families who don't. Thank you.
My turn. Okay. So to clarify, I am supportive of the Sustainable Energy Program. It is not tax money. It is profits generated through LES that are diverted to this program. And yes, we have not spent all those dollars each year. And because of that, we have not, LES has not increased the dollars going into that program. I would support a little bit of innovation here. And for all those dollars that are not spent in a fiscal year, those could be rolled over into a program to help pay for energy bills for low-income families, as well as education, so people can know more about this plan.
Thank you, sir. Now we've talked about water, we've talked about electricity, and we've talked about the climate. Next, we'll talk about food. This question talks about the recent data reporting through Feeding America and the Community Health Endowment shows roughly 12% of Lincoln households are food insecure, with the rate even higher for households with children. Additionally, events from historic floods to the COVID-19 pandemic have demonstrated the fragility of our food supply and the disproportionate impact on our most vulnerable community members. Do you support growing our efforts to ensure the food security of all Lincoln residents? And tell us how you would plan to do that. And Elina, this goes to you first.
Yes, I absolutely support this. I think this is an important topic that should be open to discussion. I think the people of this city need to have some ownership in this. I would be open to having a discussion and kind of gathering ideas of what people would suggest as suggestions. I'm all about community resources, pulling together as a community, creating opportunities for community involvement, possibly incentives, education, all of that. Like I said, it's an important topic that people need to have ownership in, as it is affecting, people on the 12% that are food insecure. People are kind of the best way to, the people that have an ownership in the issue are better prepared to give feedback and feedback that can be very beneficial, something that others may not think of.
Thank you. Trevor, your comments, please, about the food situation in Lincoln.
So I do support any and all efforts we can do to obviously encourage food independence, whereas that might be reforming one of your lot parks to have a little plot or two where you can grow some biodiverse veggies. I was fortunate enough actually to grow, to live a little bit right next to Tim Rennie, who has sponsored the Holly Hamlet, which has actually seen what was initially about 4 or 6 plots of little gardens into a huge area of the neighborhood. And I think that obviously that feeds into, if you have stake in the ownership of where you live, you can obviously grow a huge plot and obviously really propagate food security. This also goes into encouraging people to utilize the farmers market. Even before the farmers market here in Lincoln was always down in the Haymarket, you had Lee's down in South Lincoln or Southwest Lincoln, which would always encourage a farmers market on the outskirt of their business. So obviously linking up citizens with local producers, and also encouraging people to, obviously collect their own rainwater, put your own plot in, and utilize the Nebraska extension to either get some pollinators or some vegetables, and then please trade with your neighbors. One last thing, I do encourage people to obviously house chickens as well. That's obviously one thing of food stability that you can also do to make sure that you're trading with your neighbors, you're providing your own stable food resource. So I absolutely do support efforts to grow food security here in Lincoln, and there's a lot of things that we should really not incentivize, but definitely encourage people and give people the proper resources so they can find the knowledge to do it properly.
Thank you, sir. Bennie Shobe, your comments about the food security.
Well, first off, I want to agree with Mr. Reilly and give a shout out to the Holly Hamlet and Southern Heights Food Forest and the community crops in our community where people are growing food. The question went to, should empty city properties be leased for food production? I grew up on a farm in Kentucky and we had a big garden, but that was a lot because of economics. We grew a lot of our own food, but we didn't have a lot of diversity of food. And that would be my only concern. To answer the question directly, yes, I think we should do more of that, more leasing of empty city properties to grow food. But I'm a little concerned about the diversity of crops. We as a community, we as a civilization have gotten used to seeing a large variety of foods in our produce section. and way more foods than I grew up with. We had just a very small selection. What would we grow on those properties, and how would it be diverse, and how could we actually get it delivered to people who need it would be concerns. But I think that is something we really do need to talk about. We need to invest in, we need to investigate, and make sure it's a community-wide, diverse conversation with all the people at the table who would benefit from this. Thank you.
I think we need to charge Tim Renna for the publicity we're giving him tonight.
Yes.
Maggie May Squires, if you would like to comment. It looks like you have some food growing on one of your shelves there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can use indoor space to create an environment to grow any kind of food. And as I've said before, public spaces should be used for outdoor and indoor food production. Every park should have a garden space. This brings the community together. It gives us a sense of belonging, which is so important. Every school should have both an indoor and an outdoor garden. Again, using solar to help generate power for anything that's needed, especially if you're using hydroponics. This saves costs, and it educates young kids. It educates people on supply and demand, especially in schools. To have this kind of environment growing up, I would have learned so much about business in 3rd grade. All public space food, I believe, should be provided to the most vulnerable and low-income citizens, if not always at a low cost or free. We import a ton of food to the state. And as the climate continues to change, we can't count on things like that. I heard by 2050, there might not be any place to grow coffee anymore. So, so obviously this is something that we need to look at very carefully. All things are local. If you can grow locally, you can sell locally. And I think that there should be incentives to grow locally indoors. I think using city-owned property is a fantastic idea for food production. Leasing this land to low cost to community farmers, markets, market gardeners would allow the money to stay in Lincoln, and it would benefit Lincoln businesses and Lincoln citizens. Thanks.
Thank you. And Joe Swanson, you're next on the list. Tell us about your thoughts about food.
Well, this is one of my favorite questions, and some of my experiences over the years of supporting farmers have been driven off their land by the bankers and loan sharks. And the example of my trips to Cuba a couple of times, seeing how they have being under the 61-year embargo by the U.S. government, as how they have been able to sustain the people by opening up every piece of land in the cities vacant. So I think under the control of those working the land as cooperatives with open books for public inspection, setting the prices at the lowest cost for consumers and public, and in addition to develop public works programs to raise the food supply, and organizing the transportation to consumers, and also along that public work run to prevent the flooding of land.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. And next on my list is Sändra Washington.
I'd like to start by addressing the question about the use of city land. We've been approached by a number of folks about using city land for these purposes, and I support this. The city right now has over 1,700 acres of land that we manage in crop production, and we're beginning to rethink those leases and encourage more regenerative farming practices or conservation tillage, so that we're sequestering carbon on those lands. And we're beginning to also look at leasing those lands, changing the leases up when they expire for food production. Right now they're in feed and in hay. And I would encourage the city to really look at those leases and put them more into food production than into hay. I also think Lincoln's blessed to be in the same location as our state's large land grant university. And I really would like to convene and see what happens when we put the East Campus Ag Program and Innovation Campus and the Southeast Culinary Program together in the same room with local and near local producers, including, I have to mention it again, Holly, Hamlet, and the Community Crops Programs, because I think it would be very interesting to see what they could do and what they could put together.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Beckius, I'm anxious to hear your thoughts about this.
And I just want to clarify, Randy, we're on the Feeding America question, is that correct?
Yes. Recent
Okay.
data reported Feeding America and the Community Health Endowment shows 12% of Lincoln households are food insecure.
Sure. Thank you. So food security, especially for children, provides the foundation for opportunities for children to grow and thrive during those most early years of development, but also through years of schooling as well. I think we all know and understand that food security aids children in development, but also with learning as well. So when we talk about food security, we need to make sure that we're talking about feeding everyone in our community, regardless of whether or not they have a garden, regardless of whether or not they have land in order to actually grow something in. So food security can range from a wide variety of topics, but we have to make sure that we're covering everyone in our community because frankly, not everyone has the ability to grow something of their own. So when we look at food security, we need to make sure that we are taking care of our most vulnerable communities, those communities that may not be able to grow their food, and making sure that the children of our community have the kind of food security that they need.
Thank you. Eric Burling, your comments, please.
Thank you, Tom, for actually clarifying which question we were on. I 100% support making sure that every Lincoln resident has food security, but the data reported by Feeding America isn't necessarily an accurate representation of Lincoln. That study determines its numbers and stats based on national poverty levels and based on national meal costs, not local. They made adjustments at the local level based on groceries that are taxed, which isn't the case here in Lincoln. And so they're comparing the cost of buying groceries in San Francisco and saying that's the same here in Lincoln. So the data is already flawed. If we dig in a little bit deeper, we would actually see that half of the people reported by Feeding America are receiving SNAP benefits here in Lincoln. And based on their own data, that's well above what they consider to be food insecure. Okay, so there's another 42% of that 37,000 number that are above 185% of the national poverty line. Perhaps those families are doing fine, or perhaps they're not. We can't really determine that from this national study. Okay, there's a small subset of people between the 130% and 185% poverty level line that don't receive any SNAP benefits here in Lincoln that would likely benefit from more support. Those are the people we should survey and interview to determine what and how much help is actually needed in Lincoln. Again, I 100% support making sure that every Lincoln resident has food security, but we can't determine who those people are based on a flawed national study. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Roy Christensen, your thoughts, please.
Well, the closer we produce food to the end user, the better it is for everyone. Very specifically, it reduces costs through transportation. And I'll use the name again, Tim Rinna and I, for almost 4 years now, have been trying to work with the previous administration and this administration to open up unused city lots for urban commercial agriculture. And we are both thrilled. We've contacted each other about this plan, and we're both thrilled to see finally some action on this. This is a key part of providing food security for everyone, is moving our production into unused city lots. And there are a lot of lots that are unused and owned by the city.
Thank you, sir. And Mary Hilton, your comments.
Okay, unmuted. Well, I think none of us want anybody to be food insecure in our town, and I just want to applaud the wonderful not-for-profit that help with those that are most in need, like the food bank and Food Net. And but I think that to answer the question directly, that how best to support to grow our efforts to ensure that food security of all Lincoln residents is met is really by growing our local economy. If we have good paying jobs that people are able to afford their own food, then they can feed their families, they can be independent, they can be self-reliant, parents can provide for their kids. And so I think that the best way to overall, since we have long winters and we cannot, have fresh fruit and vegetables, unless of course we grow indoors, which that certainly is a possibility, but the important thing is for people to be able to have the money that they need by having the jobs that they can work on to be able to provide food for their families.
Okay, thank you very much. Trevor Reilly, this question is yours to first answer or reply to. The Lincoln Electric system has established a goal of 100% net zero carbon by the year 2040. Do you support this goal? And what, if anything, do you believe that the city of Lincoln can do to help LES achieve the goal?
So I think I already telegraphed, I guess, my position on this one, but I do believe that small thorium salt reactors are the best way that we can move forward and be pioneers in energy development in Lincoln. Obviously, everybody is very sensitive when it comes to nuclear, but I think that thorium salt reactors are probably one of the most progressive technologies that we've seen in the 21st century, where we actually isolate the nuclear reactor to entirely mitigate the chance of explosion. And I'm not an expert on this. I have only been reviewing some of the stuff that's been going into implementation. But if we want to get to a net 0% carbon energy supply, we obviously have to look at nuclear. And so, you know, I support still deregulating with wind turbines to make them either taller, to increase the fan blade size, but that still comes with the cost of either transporting the blades. We cannot recycle the blades because you cannot recycle that fiberglass. You cannot get to the steel within that fiberglass. And additionally, with solar, you also have to consider the amount of time that it comes with mining that lithium, then producing it, all the emissions that go into producing those panels. And, you know, obviously it is good to see them installed, but I think that nuclear is really the only way to go forward for zero carbon.
Thank you. And Mr. Shobe, your comment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Bretz. I want to talk about your question was, do I support the goal of 2040? 2040 would be a goal. We would strive toward achieving it, but I would also like to point out that technology changes. 2040 is 20 years away. I think we should work toward that goal, but as technology advances, we might find new and different avenues to become more carbon neutral. I'd also like to talk about the fact that Lincoln has embraced something called energy saving corporations, which could lead to something like Mr. Reilly said, where we could do more things as far as the city goes with the Public Buildings Commission, maybe solar panels on all those flat surfaces, kind of like Ms. Squires said. We can do those things, and with the energy saving corporations, they're done in a manner where they pay for themselves and the energy cost savings. But as we all I think will acknowledge, the price of solar panels has come down over the years, and it will continue to drop as technology improves. So I would support moving toward carbon neutral in 2040, but I don't think Lincoln, much like LES has done, should be an early adopter of new technologies. We should be prudent and use deliberate methods toward getting there, becoming more efficient, and things like our city fleet. Maybe we need to move toward more efficient vehicles or more electric vehicles and fewer cars in general. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. And Maggie, your comments, please.
So a goal of 100% net zero carbon by 2040. Yeah, that's great. Who doesn't? I support this. I'd be interested who doesn't support this. That's what we're all going to say. But really, how does this affect each citizen in Lincoln? You know, we obviously need to continue to expand our use of solar technologies. I'm liking what Trevor's saying about the nuclear. You know, yes, technology changes. In 20 years, we're going to know so much more than we do now. And I think we'll have a lot of more options available. But moving this way creates opportunity. It not only lowers costs for our citizens, but it creates job opportunity, and it creates a world that's going to be better for our children.
All right, thank you. And Joe, your comments, please, about the Lincoln Electric system, zero carbon by 2040.
Well, I think I spoke on this earlier, and I'll just repeat some of the comments I made. You know, the capital government and their class own every kind of energy source, and all you have to do is look at Texas recently with the storms and the icing, and you know, it was a destruction of many people's lives in that case, because you know. And over the decades, capitalist companies, with the support of their government, have peddled the schemes of carbon tax and carbon fees for decades. Meanwhile, finance capital continues to reap profits from the sale of commodities such as all the energy sources. I don't know how much of you know the knowledge of what kind of pollution in these factories that make these wind blades. I had a very good friend, a fellow worker who worked there, and described this at the National Farmers Organization in Omaha a few years ago. If we translate everything commonly thought as an environmental issue into how to advance the protection of the working class and how the working class can extend that protection at all, then we can hardly ever go wrong.
Okay, thank you. Sändra, your comments, please.
First, I support the goal of getting to net zero, but I think how we get there is going to be a mix of ways. I don't think there's one way to get there. And I'd rather see a good mix of energy sources, and I'd expect that research and new technologies are also going to provide us ways to get there as well. I have to point out, having lived in a community that went private on energy, that living in a state that really embraces public energy is such a great thing. Our energy costs are so much lower than they are in many other states where they've privatized energy sources. So I just want to thank Nebraska for public power. And I also want to say that besides, you know, the idea of being more energy efficient and being helpful to the planet, this climate action plan is about making us resilient, which makes us stronger to deal with anything that comes our way, whether it is climate change, or it's some other disaster. And being a resilient community is what makes us stronger. And so anything that helps us to be better prepared, I am for.
Thank you very much. Mr. Beckius, your comments, please.
Thank you, Randy. Yes, I support the LES goal of 100% net zero carbon by 2040 because carbon concentrations are harmful. It's as simple as that. The city can help LES achieve this goal by integrating incentives into every facet of our city life, both public and private. A few of the other candidates have talked about those incentive programs already. But we can also encourage rooftop solar, ground-mounted solar, work with our other partners in both the county and the state levels to support other energy sources as well. Integrate net zero carbon vehicles across the city fleet, and of course, continue to explore the expansion of other financing opportunities to support the good work being done by LES.
Thank you, sir. Eric Burling, your comments, please.
Thank you. I'll support any goal that will reduce costs to the city and its taxpayers. The LES goal will reduce our taxes and reduce costs, then I'll support it. But I don't believe we should increase costs or tax to accomplish this goal. I have an office in and spend time in one of the most polluted cities in the world. For us to sit here in Lincoln with our beautiful air, wonderful lives, and argue about spending millions of taxpayer dollars on reducing emissions and climate change goals is silly when people on the other side of the planet go about their lives polluting and littering and having absolutely no concern for the planet. One city over there pollutes as much in 1 week as Lincoln pollutes in an entire year. Lincoln is beautiful, and it's wonderful that so many people want to help this planet, but any change we make in Lincoln will have no significant impact on the planet. Lincoln's land is 0.00005% of the planet. That's equivalent to a penny somewhere along the interstate between LA and DC. If people truly cared about carbon emissions, they would stop consuming so many goods. Lincoln's consumption alone is responsible for 2.5 megatons of carbon emissions in China each year, and that's just our consumption of Chinese goods. Okay, the minimal impact on our planet from net zero carbon energy production in Lincoln is not worth supporting if it comes with higher costs for taxpayers. We need to wait for new technologies to be cost efficient before we invest in them. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Roy Christensen, your comments, please, on the net zero carbon goal by 2040.
Thank you, Randy. I think this is an interesting goal. The problem with renewable energy sources is storage of energy, and that means lack of reliability. We've seen what happens when the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow. Currently, energy storage is the main issue that is stopping us from adopting these things at a bigger scale, because there is no good economical way to store energy produced by these renewables. Having said that, I do expect that we will have innovation come forward in the future. So I would say to this whole thing, innovate, 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 and diversify. We've got to remain diversified, just like anybody's retirement plan. It can't be all eggs in one basket. We've got to diversify our energy portfolio for production of energy. And then we will be truly resilient as a community and prepared to take advantage of technologies as they develop. But energy storage is the limiting factor we have right now for adopting these kind of renewable resources.
Thank you, sir. Mary Hilton, your comments, please.
Yeah, so when I think of the purpose of LES, I believe they really should have one goal, and that is to produce reliable and economical power that meets the needs of its residents and businesses. You know, that's really why it's in existence. And so we have to be realistic in how that can come about as we grow as a city and our electrical needs increase. So as a steward, you know, we have to think about efficiencies and practicalities. And I don't think that overburdening ourselves by putting our own excessive regulations that will increase, you know, I've sat in the LES meetings when they've talked about this and what it will actually cost on passing the expense of getting to 100% net carbon zero by 2040 is twice the cost. And we really don't even have the technology to be able to do that at this time. And so I think that we need to be careful about making goals that aren't achievable and will only cost taxpayers and residents.
Thank you. And the final person to comment on this question is Elina Newman. Elina?
Thank you. Tom, I was going to address you, but I can't grow food to save my life, so I killed a cactus, so that's a problem. And Maggie, if we run out of coffee, we're also in trouble because I'm going to be a cranky person. But yes, in general, I support this goal. But again, I want to have discussions about this and how we're going to approach this. I need pros and cons. I believe that this is going to come from a multi-pronged approach. I support being a responsible citizen and doing everything possible to minimize waste or unnecessary consumption. For example, turning off lights when not in the room, ensuring that the thermostat is set at a tolerable temperature, et cetera, et cetera. And addressing the question again, my question in response to the question is at what expense? Whatever we do, we have to ask the question about financing. The city can ensure that the lights are turned off in their facilities. It can convert all city fleet vehicles to be electric. It can keep buildings appropriately heated or cooled. Same with citizens. However, at the same time, helping does not equal to potentially requiring or mandating people in their own home or going without power or being limited in living their everyday, day-to-day lives. For example, you know, spending that's going to be needed in purchasing an electric car, for example.
Okay, Mr. Shobe, this next question comes to you first. And I see you have a bicycle hanging behind you there. I don't know what you use that for, but increased use of public transportation helps lower carbon emissions. Would you support increased access and availability of public transit like StarTran? And if so, how?
Thank you, Mr. Bretz. Yes, I would support that. If we're talking about, our previous question was talking about lowering our carbon footprint. One way we do that is using fewer cars. We are car culture. I drive a vehicle. Many times it would be easier for me to walk than drive my vehicle, find a parking spot. But our culture is geared toward driving. I would like to move our culture and our thinking toward mass transit. It would take a little bit of effort. One of the things we've discussed is making StarTran fare free. But there's also some issues with that. If it became fare free and there was a large increase in ridership, Would we have the infrastructure to handle that many increase of people? It needs, I would support, I would encourage it. I'd also like to see our nation go to high-speed rail at some point in the near future. But it's going to take some creativity and see if we can work toward goals that are sustainable, reasonable, and prudent. And for Mr. Reeves, I'm sorry about the audio, old Chromebook.
Okay, Maggie May Squires, your comments on this.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Public transportation is so important to citizens, especially low-income citizens. StarTran needs to move towards electric, but using its own power source. Again, you have to take a step back to go a step forward. So yeah, we might be using carbon fuels to create solar panels, but eventually we'll be using solar panels to create solar panels. That's what we have to work towards, the future. We can't keep looking at the past. That's not where we're headed. So, taxpayers are burdened with the cost of electricity, the cost of power, to the point where some of them cannot afford their electricity bills. So I support transit operational hours expanding. We need to have smaller buses. If we do go to no fare, maybe we need bigger buses. I also think that we should be using light rail whenever possible, from one side of town to the other side of town would be fantastic, since we haven't yet built an access from north to south. Even between Lincoln and Omaha might be a good idea. So yeah, expanding public transportation makes sense as Lincoln continues to grow.
Okay, thank you. And Joe Swanson, your comments on this issue?
Well, growing up on a farm, how food has always been something that growing up food and feeding people has always been one of my big things in life, and to work forward, and as well as 30 years as a conductor on the railroad. And I wrote a paper many years ago on how you could, under a different society, we could actually organize a separate track each across the country, from one for passenger and one for freight. But in the cities, there is a crisis for public transportation for working people, and the need to fight for a massive government-funded public works program to build the things that working people need. That includes public transportation. Also, the education of the public has to be part of such a program that includes leaving the personal auto in the driveway and learning to take the bus, and building a public transportation to use for their benefit. The big business companies, the capitalist companies like the railroads, are out. When I worked, there was 5 people on the crew. Now they're trying to make it 1. And that's all because of the profit, and it's becoming more and more a danger for the workers on the railroad.
Okay, thank you. Sändra, your comments about the increased use of public transportation.
I would certainly want to encourage the use of public transit. I think that's a wonderful way to unclog streets, reduce carbon, improve air quality. Though, as Mr. Burling suggested, we have really excellent air quality in Lincoln. I think public transit is good. What I think we have to really think about is the cost per rider. It's a very, even when people are paying the fares, we're not covering the cost of public transit. And so if we go fare free, though we might save some money in collecting fees, now we're just going to pay the full cost of every passenger. And the only way to make this really work for us is that if more people are riding. And in some ways that means buses do need to be smaller so that we can expand routes into more areas. One of the reasons that we went in with the pilot program for scooters was to figure out how to help folks do multimodal transit and actually figure out that last mile. And we geo-fenced a smaller area in town just to see if it would work. And we have some kinks to work out in that program. I don't think it's perfect by a long ways yet, but our trail system is one of the ways that we also help to reduce cars on the road. And let's go trails.
Thank you very much. Tom Beckius, your thoughts on public transit?
Yes, I support increasing access and availability of public transit. I also support smart planning with public transportation as well, primarily through the use of better data. Increased data collection in other communities have shown opportunities to really increase efficiency of public transportation systems. For example, the micro transit opportunities like VanLink, which is currently a pilot program in use by StarTran, have used technology to create shared ride services that is helpful in really filling gaps in service and by reducing the use of larger buses. But we also have to be realistic. Bus sizes are often dictated by federal funding. So as we explore the opportunities, I think, though, to use data to our greater advantage, I think we should be able to identify greater opportunities to explore, flexible routes and perhaps even flexible service schedules as other communities are playing with right now.
Okay, thank you. Roy Christensen, your thoughts on the public transit?
Don't forget me.
Well, oh yeah, let's go first with Mr. Burling, I think.
Yes, I'm sorry, I skipped you. Eric.
Yeah, can we build a train? Is Lincoln big enough for a train right down 27th Street yet? There are a few issues with increasing StarTran availability, but the most important is that buses are inconvenient and cars aren't. Lincoln has ample parking downtown, and as long as there are plenty of places to park a car, people will choose to drive. It can take an hour to get downtown from some places in Lincoln on the bus, and that's if you show up at the bus stop right on time. God forbid you miss the bus. Time is money, and an extra hour to commute by bus is just not worth it for most people. This is basic economics. You can make it free, and it won't matter. It's practically free already. A monthly pass is only $17, and yet still so few people ride the bus. If we can increase the demand for the bus, then I say let's have more routes and more buses, but I'd much prefer we focus on building a ride sharing app for Lincoln that keeps the 25% fee in Lincoln instead of sending it back to Silicon Valley. We can encourage owners of hybrids and electric cars and eventually electric vans by giving them a percentage of that 25%. So they earn more with our program than they would with Uber or Lyft, and the rest of the fee becomes revenue for the city, which can help fund roads and expand our public transportation system. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And now, Roy, it's your turn.
Thank you, Randy. Well, in 2013, as I mentioned before, I negotiated the deal with Black Hills Energy, where they paid for the conversion of our first 2 buses to compressed natural gas. I think it was a big step forward in making this more environmentally friendly. Also, I noticed that Carl Eskridge is in the audience. Big shout out to Carl. Carl and I in 2014 kind of spearheaded the renovation, so to speak, of the StarTran bus routes and developed a plan that has been, since it was adopted the next year, to have progressing goals through 4 different stages to improve StarTran and make it more accessible, make it quicker and easier to use. The real issue here is we have the must use on the bus system and the may use. And the issue is we've got to get more may use people adopting the option of using the bus. And for as far as how much people are paying, what the fares only pay for about 17% of the total cost, but it's an important 17%. We just need to get more of those may use to join people on the bus.
Thank you. And Mary Hilton, your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, I kind of live in 2 camps. I'm a mom of 7 kids, so I drive around with a full van and it's very efficient. If I get to where I need to go, and I get to take a lot of people with me. I can't imagine that an option for many families in town would be to use mass transit. It just is, it's hard to imagine how to get groceries when you have a mass quantity. You know, when I shop, I fill up the back end of my vehicle. It's hard to imagine getting on a bus with that. So I just don't think that a bus is realistic option for many in our community, nor would they want that. We, you know, government exists to protect liberties. And I think that the idea of being independent and having a vehicle is a really important thing in our community and not something that's going to go away. But on the other side is I also have a daughter with epilepsy who uses the bus system. And I know that it can be more efficient, that it is needed for many in our community. And so I'm sympathetic and I believe in encouraging cost-effective and weighing those benefits with the cost to provide the needs for mass transit.
Thank you very much. Elina, your thoughts on the mass transit?
So I do think that our public transportation needs to be looked at to make it available for those who want to use it. It does need to be more efficient. It needs to be more frequent. However, we're also not a state like California or New York. We're not that big. We have to have a means to accomplish the goal that is feasible and meets the needs of the people. Public transportation should be not forced on anyone. I personally, just like others, like my vehicle, mainly because I used to live in a country where main transportation from point A to point B was public transportation. And I like my freedom to go where I want, when I want. I also have my daughter to get from point A to point B. My husband and I are ballroom dancers, so we travel all the time to a variety of different venues for our hobby. I don't want to waste my time and wait for a bus for an hour, not to mention all my dresses and all the stuff that I have to carry with me. It's just not feasible. My vehicle registration, so wheel tax and the gas tax are used or should be used to pay for roads. Parking fares are used to fund city expenses. Also, there's just a waste of time on the road. There's a give and take in any decision. I don't think that a cookie cutter approach works for this. So availability is great, but I do not support people being forced into it.
Okay, thank you very much. And Trevor Reilly, you get the final say on this today.
All right, well, my peers have already hit on a lot of good points, so I'll just go ahead and kind of echo some of them and expand a little bit. But Councilwoman Washington is absolutely correct that bike trails help connect and reduce street use. So if we can obviously just focus on where we're effective in applying that, we can reduce city budget to make sure that Lincoln is able to bike to where they want. I know that during Snowmageddon this year, I still saw plenty of people out on their fat bikes, biking around to get to where they needed to, and that's pretty awesome. It's pretty admirable. Councilman Christensen has already talked about how they've upgraded the fleet, and so we have this fleet. We should effectively use it. So maybe when it comes to summer stops, when school is out and we still have young kids who maybe aren't able to drive, we should be able to facilitate them to activities or libraries or other extracurriculars that are available in the summer. And so obviously giving them access and letting them know about the StarTran bus app is probably one of the most effective ways to still get youth to use the bus system, because obviously this gives them that independence that they're looking for when they're not able to drive. So utilizing the things that we already have and propagating the information and the things that are available is probably the best way to drive that use. Otherwise, the best way we can look at reducing our carbon usage for vehicles is making our streets more effective so that you are not stopping at unnecessary stoplights. You're effectively driving through the city, getting to where you need to be. And so that looks at making our thoroughfares the most effective to reduce starting and stopping so that you're actively, you're using the most efficiency out of your engine. So there's a lot of things I have a lot more to expand on, but there's just more than 70 seconds can allow.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a comment about the trail system. I live near a trail and I walk on it frequently, and the traffic has really increased, and I really like the trails we have. Our next question, Maggie Squires, this goes to you first. Many areas of the city have multiple trash recycling and pickup services driving down the same streets, contributing to street disrepair, air pollution, and safety concerns. If elected, would you support an in-depth analysis of the city's waste collection system in order to identify opportunities to gain collection efficiencies? Maggie?
Yeah, I think I would. I believe an in-depth study of waste collection systems would be a good way to identify efficiencies and where we're deficient, as well as perhaps save taxpayer dollars. But it also makes me wonder at what cost to local business. We are a capitalist society. I am a small business owner who had to close my doors due to the COVID pandemic. So I'm very sensitive to businesses losing their potential to gain revenue in our city. However, I think I would support boosting recycling, improving the segregated waste collection, something like composting. Advanced cities also work to eliminate single-use items like plastic bags. So, waste energy programs, capturing the gas from landfills. There's so many ways that we can help to offset some of the negative impacts of waste collection.
Thank you. Joe Swanson, your comments on trash and recycling pickup.
Well, I don't think we need an analysis. We just need to organize ourselves as under the, it's using working people and their initiative. What is needed is to collect the waste by using workers' control and with union scale wages to service the social needs, including the picking up of trash and waste. I just want to add under the next question, I just want to say that the hazardous waste collection and safe destruction of hazardous waste should be also paid for by the class that creates the waste and the hazardous material.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sändra, your thoughts about our trash and recycling pickup.
When I moved to Lincoln in 1990, I had not used a private hauler before. I've lived in a community where there has been community or city-run waste programs, and I've lived in communities where we took our trash to the dump ourselves. And so coming to Lincoln, I was really interested in how many small businesses were available to take care of waste, but it seemed more organized 30 years ago that it was one hauler had a district or a neighborhood. I think that any conversation about greater efficiencies needs to bring all the haulers together to talk about this, because this is their business. And even though they have overlapping territories or no territories at all any longer, I think that I would really welcome the conversation to talk about how do we get more efficiency in our waste hauling program without damaging small businesses who are making their living hauling our trash. And anything that helps to reduce the amount of waste that's going into our landfill is a good thing. And that is going to have to be a lot about individual choices about how much we purchase and how much we throw away.
Thank you. And Tom Beckius, your thoughts, please.
So I do support an analysis of looking at the city's waste collection system. However, I can't say at this point in time that I would be on board with changing the process that we have currently in place. As other candidates have mentioned, small business owners are running our waste disposal and recycling services for the majority of folks here in town. As Councilwoman Washington mentioned previously, most providers were working in certain areas of town, but as competition has increased, those providers have moved into areas across the city. So I am torn with the idea of moving towards anything that would resemble a city provided service or a city bid service for the entire town, because I do think constituents benefit from the ability to shop around providers. And I would hate to see those cost benefits lost. So I would potentially look at a possibility of bidding out specific districts in town. But I think that would be a big maybe at this point.
All right, thank you. Eric Burling, your comments on this issue.
Sure. No, I wouldn't support spending any taxpayer money on an analysis that's going to take away jobs and end businesses. A plan to gain collection efficiencies sounds a lot like our government deciding which waste collection company in Lincoln deserves more business and which waste collection company in Lincoln should be out of business. That's crony capitalism, and it's precisely what we need less of in government. I don't support the government determining which waste collection company gets which neighborhood. I don't support limiting opportunities for the citizens of Lincoln, and I certainly don't support destroying the livelihoods of small business owners and their employees. Let's not waste taxpayer money on creating a complex solution to a problem that doesn't exist. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Roy Christensen, your comments, please.
Years ago, Germans from Russia came over and joined our Lincoln community, and many of those people found their way into the garbage hauling business. A strong family tradition exists in these businesses. Also, over my last 8 years, I've had chances to meet with city council members in Omaha, and I asked them, what is the source of the greatest complaints that you receive from your citizens? And the answer is always garbage hauling. Omaha has a contracted single hauler system that is broken. Our system is not broken. If it's not broken, don't fix it. People like the service they receive, and it's good quality service because of the competition.
Thank you, sir. And Mary Hilton, your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll just piggyback off of Roy, because I love my garbage haulers because they always return my trash can back to my garage area. You know, it doesn't get blown down the street on high wind days. And there are some, Elina and I live on the same street, and there's a lot of variety of haulers that go up and down our street. We live on a dead end street on the edge of town, but we each want our garbage haulers. And I believe that you know, that's the beauty of the free market system, is that we can pick and choose what companies we want to award with our business. And those businesses find their own efficiencies on keeping their costs low, which then are passed on to me, the consumer. And that weighs into my decision as well of who I want to have as my garbage hauler. And so to support the free market system, I think that we don't need to spend another $100,000 on an analysis. We spend a lot of $100,000 analyses in our city, and this is the one that's not needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor, I'd like to hear your comments next.
So I would not support an in-depth examination, obviously piggybacking off of my peers. It sounds like there is robust competition, and I've obviously always also lived in multiple areas of the city, and I have seen that the trash collection is usually pretty dependable, usually pretty reliant. And I think that the greatest difference we have to do is just making sure that we're also picking up our own trash just that we see. You know, I think that just kind of making that own individual impact to make our own city beautified and just putting the trash in the receptacle, we can be pretty certain that's going to be picked up.
Bennie, your thoughts on this matter?
Going last is fun. I get to listen to everybody else's comments first and then follow up. I grew up in rural Kentucky, in Bowling Green, Kentucky, actually, and we had a municipal service that we eventually phased out and went to private haulers. Here in Lincoln, we use a free enterprise system. It's market driven. Those of you who own residential property and pay a trash hauler get lobbied constantly by other haulers who have a better price. That's working pretty well as far as price goes. But the question also asked about the multiple trucks up and down the street and damage to infrastructure. And as a council person, several times a year, we get a rash of emails from residents saying, I've had 5 trucks go up my street this week and none of them stop. They just tear up my neighborhood. I'm not sure exactly how we can streamline that process. Right now, the business model, the capitalist model, the free enterprise model is working to keep costs down for our residents. How do we balance that against the cost of repairing their streets and providing for infrastructure? That's why I would encourage a study to figure out how we can do that better. Where's the balance? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bennie. We are down to the final question. And this one, Joseph or Joe, will be yours to answer first. The recent Salt Creek resiliency study found that Lincoln's system of levees may not be sufficient, and flooding may increase significantly in coming years due to changes in land use and climate change. What actions, if any, should the city take to reduce the risk of flooding and adverse impacts on residents and businesses along Salt Creek? Joe?
Hey, Randy. Sorry, really quick. Elina didn't get to answer that question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Elina. Forgive me. We'll jump back to Elina, and Joe, that gives you an extra few seconds to prepare your answer.
Oh, I thought I was missing out. My goodness. So I agree with Mary. I love our trash, our trash collecting company. I would not change them for the world. They actually come to my house if I didn't put out my trash can and get my trash can because sometimes, you know, I have a 13-year-old who does that, and sometimes she forgets. So I appreciate the fact that they'll come to my house and get the trash. I do not support this at this time. I do not support a cost analysis at this time. The benefit has to outweigh the cost. I think people have choices now, and choices are good. It drives competition, it drives innovation. And I will echo I can't remember who said this, but why fix something that's working? You know, we can spend that money elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much. I apologize for missing you. Okay, Joe, now it's your turn to talk about the risk of flooding in Salt Creek. Your comments, please.
Well, floods have ravaged cities and rural areas, have wreaked havoc on the livelihood of tens of thousands of working people and working farmers in the area and across the region, especially those closest to overflowing creeks and rivers. The catastrophes of floods and other natural disasters is just another example of how capitalism has no regard for the consequences to workers and farmers or the environment. I'm an old union man, so the unions need to fight for a government-financed public works program to put the many unemployed working people to work at union scale wages, building flood control levees, as well as other social needs like more hospitals, schools, housing, and mass transportation, all those things that workers need.
Thank you. And Sändra, your thoughts.
Thank you. The Salt Creek flood study is a really good study, and I think it points out to us something that we've probably known for a while, is that flooding in the Salt Creek is gotten worse. And it's really disheartening and troubling to see that the levees may not be able to take care of all of that. I think that there are lots of different ways to approach this. There are both structural and non-structural solutions. It's not going to be one solution fixes the whole program or whole problem. It's going to be a mix of solutions. And I think this is also a very big environmental justice issue. The folks who are most at harm, most vulnerable to the Salt Creek study are the folks who live in the areas north of downtown that we sometimes call the North Bottoms, and also the south, just south of the Haymarket area as well. And I think we really need to think about who's being harmed by this. And though there are lots of programs that suggest we should buy people out, that also can damage neighborhoods and the social structure of neighborhoods. And so I'd like any solutions or group of solutions that we put together to involve the residents of those neighborhoods most impacted being part of the discussion for the solutions.
Thank you. Mr. Beckius, what about the risk of flooding?
Sure. I think the obviously the risk to lives and the destruction of property near Salt Creek is a serious concern. And I do believe that it will continue to get worse over time. I support, along with Councilwoman Washington, structural floodplain management measures, such as, continued maintenance of the levee system, but also potential look at increased dam constructions, as well as non-structural measures such as open space preservation and, incentives for cluster subdivisions. It's going to be critically important, however, for us to keep in mind that we're going to need strong community partnerships and assistance with a lot of other entities to tackle this issue. Especially the Lower Platte South NRD, FEMA, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I think over time, this is something that we can tackle and something that we can approach, but it's a serious issue that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Beckius. Eric Burling, your comments on the Salt Creek flooding.
Sure. Yeah, this is a tough question to answer because of the massive cost of both preventative measures against floods and floods themselves. We can widen, we can deepen, we can divert, we can plant more trees. But honestly, when it's man versus nature, man doesn't often win unless he has an extraordinary budget. Floods have an impact on our entire city, so I will support economically responsible and federally funded efforts to protect the city against future floods. I won't, however, support unlimited spending to fix a problem that's already priced into those properties. Buying or building homes in the floodplain involves risk. The land is worth less, the market value is lower because of the risk of flooding. Property owners in these areas know this. They should have flood insurance. They should consider flood proofing their homes. I would support initiatives that require new construction in the floodplain to require a minimum amount of flood proofing, because when the area does flood, our entire community will suffer. Thank you.
Thank you. Roy Christensen, your thoughts, please.
Thanks, Randy. So the study, Salt Creek study, has been overall a good thing. I'm disappointed in that the recommendations do not specifically include structural changes to detention and diversion projects along all the tributaries of the Salt Creek. This has been under discussion for at least 5 years now between county board and the city council and the Natural Resources District. It needs to happen. There's not one single component of the plan that could do anything greater than step-by-step institution of diversion and detention projects along all of the tributaries of Salt Creek, beginning on the south side of the city and working around downstream as we go. And Sändra's right, this disproportionately impacts low-income people, but everything we can do to bring portions of the city out of the floodplain will be beneficial to everybody, and especially beneficial to housing prices in the long run.
All right, thank you, Roy. Mary, it's your next.
Okay. Well, I live right next to the Salt Creek. There's a bend in the creek that is probably just a few hundred feet from my home where I'm sitting right now. And my understanding of the history of flooding along Salt Creek is that there have been over 100 floods in the 150 years of our city. So this isn't anything new. We have a wilderness park as part of the solution, as a watershed solution. That's why it exists. It didn't exist as a park. It was really a watershed area. I'm glad it's a park because we sure enjoy it. You know, and years ago when we had that 7 inches of rain all along the Salt Creek, Old Cheney at the end of my street was flooded. We were in canoes helping neighbors who were trapped on our street. And so there have been some things that have mitigated that. But I'm open to exploring common sense, cost-effective solutions moving forward that don't undermine personal property rights or create unreasonable, unjustified regulations passed on to citizens and businesses.
All right, thank you very much. Elina, I will not forget you this time. Your thoughts on the Salt Creek flooding.
Awesome. So structurally, I would support what needs to be done, of course, with fiduciary responsibility in mind. After a thorough look at pros and cons, I would want to get quotes from a variety of companies, sources. I'd want an opportunity to ask questions. These types of decisions are like making a repair on a house. You know it's going to happen. So at some point you need a plan for it, but how much planning is too much planning? I know at some point my house may burn down from a fire, but do I go around, you know, fireproofing everything every day, every month? No. You know, I do what I can. We need to be prepared, but again, we also need to be fiscally responsible. I also think we need to be able to help businesses and residents in the area. It's not a cookie cutter situation. Again, as it depends. We need a variety of sources, variety of options that are both structural and non-structural. We need ways to get people back to work. We need to get those businesses back into operation. And as Councilwoman Washington said, I would love, just like her, I would love to get people together who are impacted by this to see what their suggestions are, because ultimately they may have something that, you know, they may have an option or a suggestion that we just did not think of.
Okay, thank you very much. Trevor, your comments on this matter.
Okay, so there is a viewer who did properly correct me, and I said reservoir. I misspoke and said reservoir where I meant watershed. And I believe that the Antelope Creek project has done well to actually prevent overflooding into the Salt Creek project. When it comes to mitigating that overflow, in the long term, if we look at basically earth moving is probably the most cost-effective option into putting in place a place where that water may have an excess area to flow into in the event of extreme weather events. Otherwise, really, we have to look at long-term of what the Antelope Creek project has done to mitigate any other flooding. And we really have to rely on civil engineers and surveying to make sure that we're going to be putting in place a long-term solution to make sure that that water flow is going to always be directed into an excess area.
Bennie Shobe, your thoughts on the Salt Creek area?
Thank you, Mr. Bretz. As Councilman Christensen said, first off, going last is a lot of fun. Everybody else has all these great ideas, and I just get to agree and then add on. We have been studying the Salt Creek flooding thing for many years, and there have been lots of plans in place. The Antelope Valley Project took a lot of residences in Lincoln out of the floodplain, and developments like that will be good in the future. I'm also a little bit concerned that we are operating on 100-year and 500-year flood data. And as our climate changes, those models aren't as effective as they used to be. So I like to look at some more diversion, some more upstream management of the water from flooding while we reevaluate the data. The idea of bringing more buildable lots out of the floodplain will help our housing shortage problem in Lincoln. So it has to be a balance between getting affordable housing, buildable lots for our residents of our community, and managing those people who already live here to make sure they have safe places to live. And we will have it's a long conversation. We need to have lots of voices at the table, a large, diverse group of residents helping us make those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Maggie May Squires, you get the last word on this matter.
Sure, scientists and professionals, right? Scientists are telling us that flooding is going to happen more frequently, that severe rain events are going to happen more frequently. Sometimes you have to spend money to save money. The Antelope Valley project was very successful. We need to continue our infrastructure improvements, especially to our levee system. We need to draw as much of the city out of the floodplain as we possibly can. During the last flood just a couple of years ago, what might have happened had we not done the Antelope Valley project? So, you know, when we update our infrastructure, when we put money into our city, it creates jobs, it reduces risks to businesses and residents. And that's what we want to do. We want to mitigate risks so that taxpayers in the future are saving money.
And thank you. With that last response, we have reached the end of our time this evening. And on behalf of the hosts, I want to thank you for exhibiting your civic responsibility by watching this forum, and remind you that on Tuesday, April 6th, you'll have the opportunity to vote for 3 of these candidates, and the top 6 will be placed on the main ballot. And on May 4th, you'll have the opportunity to vote for the 3 candidates that will fill the open seats. I want to say thank you to the candidates participating, not only in this forum, but for participating in our government by putting your name on the ballot. And I want to thank our sponsors, and that includes Bluestem Group of the Nebraska Sierra Club, Citizens Climate Lobby of the Lincoln Coalition for Environmental Improvement, the Friends of Wilderness Park, the Green Sanctuary Committee of the Unitarian Church of Lincoln, the Joslyn Institute for Sustainable Communities, Lincoln Friends Meeting, the Nebraska Conservation Voters, the Nebraska Interfaith Power and Light, Nebraskans for Peace, the Nebraska Recycling Council, Sustain UNL, and the Wachiska Audubon Society. This is Randy Bretz. Remember, the primary election is on April 6th, just 3 weeks from today, and the general election on May 4th. Good evening.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.